Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the call today. I'm Taqiya Chowdhury, a Senior Solution Engineer here at Scoro. Today, what we will do is go ahead and basically dive into the platform to give you firsthand insight into what Scoro looks like so that you have a better understanding of interconnected workflows across departments and basically being able to maybe standardize some of these processes along the way. At the end of the day, the ultimate goal is the reporting insights and the business decisions that you'd want to make for your company. And in order to do that, you want to have those kind of building blocks in place to support that infrastructure. What we'll do is actually dive right into the demo environment, and then we can go ahead and get started. So what we're looking at first and foremost is actually something like a pipeline view within Scoro. Scoro does have a CRM kind of component in it, and some of our clients that maybe don't need a fully fledged CRM will rely on Scoro CRM. Other clients that are, like Harv mentioned, already using something like Salesforce or HubSpot typically end up kind of living in that tool and then doing some type of a manual handover. However, Scoro enables you with this pipeline functionality to actually integrate those deals and opportunities you have in those other tools within Scoro so that you can actually go ahead and have some oversight into those pipelines. In this case right now, you can see we have a full pipeline, so we'll just make the assumption that you're using it within Scoro. And in this case, what's happening is that in the early stages, we can actually see that we have something maybe in the new lead. And with that in mind, you are typically creating a deal, creating an opportunity, maybe tagging some discrete value against it. Maybe it's the client budget, maybe it's an estimated amount of how much you think the contract could be for. However, throughout this process, as you are continuously discussing things with the client, you are typically moving these deals forward, whether that's in spreadsheets, some siloed tool, HubSpot, whatever it may be. As you continue that process, you also want to start actually detailing that scoping process as well. And a lot of times, many of our clients today are actually doing it inside of spreadsheets. Because of that, it becomes harder to maybe have updated deal values in your CRMs or be able to push that information onto someone like the delivery team so that they have oversight of incoming deals. A view like this in the system can be accessible to the rest of the team so that they at least know what could be coming down the pipeline, especially if it's maybe in those later stages like proposal, negotiations, especially, of course, closed won. When we're looking at this entire pipeline, you'll also be able to see that there is an opportunity to have kind of probability rates fixed against each of the stages. So in this case right now, new lead might be 10, opportunity might be 20, scoping might be 50, so on and so forth. You'll later see that actually has a weight value against the total opportunity of uncommitted work you have within the system. In this case right now, as we continuously review how these deals are going, we'll be able to actually dive into any of these cards, which are pretty mobile, and understand the full scope of work of what it is that we're actually doing. In this case right now, we'll actually click into one of these cards and we'll go ahead and follow the process of seeing a quote, turning it into a project, and turning it into a task. It's at that stage that we'll actually enter into an ongoing project. It'll look the exact same. It'll just have a little bit more data inside of it. In this case right now, what we're looking at is actually a quote. So within the quote, like I mentioned, in the early stages, maybe you're just doing something like 100,000, 40,000, whatever it may be, and you just have kind of the client name. You might be doing some discrete notes. Throughout this process, as you start detailing, it's a brand refresh or it's going to be some type of copywriting work, SEO, whatever it may be, you'll be able to actually outline all of those different services within this view. And what that can consist of is first and foremost, maybe choosing a template, for instance. What you can do is actually outline all of the different services and kind of the full structure of maybe the deliverables, for instance, so that it auto generates this kind of a view for you. And then from there, typically what a lot of our clients like to go ahead and do is choose something like maybe what their price list is going to be. And then after that, they would be able to go ahead and start reviewing all of these different services, for instance. And with these services, they'll actually include what the scope is supposed to be. Now, some clients have it simpler. Maybe it's just an hourly rate for time and material projects. Maybe it's just a few different roles against a couple different deliverables, for instance. Maybe you're doing retainer work. There's a lot of different options in the mix. But what's going to end up happening is that with these different kind of line items in place, you will then be able to go ahead and see what the charge out is supposed to be for each of them. How do you come up with that charge out rate? It depends on how your business runs. If you have a bit more of a service-based model where the deliverable dictates the charge out rate, that's pretty simple. It's maybe 40 hours of work, 200 a rate, it'll give you a final price. But when you have a whole bunch of different roles, you have different rates, you have too many different deliverables, it can be a big, lengthy process in spreadsheets to actually outline all of that. And then what happens is that information lives in a spreadsheet, and then there's manual effort to basically transfer it to whatever project management workflow that you have in place. In this case right now, you can outline what those deliverables are, and then you can even start estimating the work or effort it would take per role or person to do that work, for instance. So in this case right now, this is opening up an estimation matrix, essentially almost like a spreadsheet. And you can see here that we still have those same line items that we outlined, but now what we do is get the opportunity to pick either roles because we don't know who it is, or a person because we do know who it is, and then we can basically go ahead and per each of these deliverables outline all of their kind of effort against it to dictate what that charge out rate should be. What's especially nice about something like this is that you will be able to have different rates as part of that process to give you that total value for each of these deliverables. And then in your kind of final pricing breakdown, you can see these numbers are a little funny. It's just because it's giving you what that blended hourly rate is depending on who's working on it. Awesome. All right. So this is all just foundationally building up what our budget is supposed to be. And naturally, we want our client to continue to push forward and eventually hit something like closed won status, for instance. Upon hitting something like a closed won status, maybe the delivery team is automatically notified. Maybe finance is automatically notified because we do have triggers enabled with all of these different statuses. It just encourages keeping the team up to date about what's going on across other departments. But then maybe what that means is Taqiya, a PM, for instance, or whoever she may be, comes in to actually create this project, therefore linking the budget to the project that you are creating. When doing this, there's options. You can have a one-off project, which is what we'll focus on today. That could encompass things like fixed fee or time and material. There's retainers. And then, of course, we want to go ahead and support your team in any other engagements that you have. So there are internal projects that typically don't maybe have a quote against it. And then from there, you're basically able to go ahead and see that all of the budgetary information here comes directly from all of the information in the quote. You create the project, and now you've entered into a project space where you are essentially living in an empty nest for the time being to start doing that project planning. In this case right now, with the quote that we just came from, we're actually able to see under something like the finances tab that it lives against this project. However, one thing that we don't really see right now yet is any project plan workflow. We are able to see some of these phases, for instance, against this project, but what we want to go ahead and do is maybe start like bringing in some of those tasks as well. There's different options to doing that. You can use templates in the system. You can go ahead and manually start creating some of these tasks. But in some cases, maybe you just want to be able to outline all of the tasks in the quote and bring them over to the project. Taking a quick break here before we follow through with that, the idea is that with the sales team having some type of an impact in the system on the budgeting side, and then having the delivery team take it over from there onwards, gives you an opportunity to start considering standardization of your projects. If you have similar engagements, we do recommend things like templating, for instance, and then you can always make changes as needed. But if you always have constantly different work, naturally that would require a little bit of manual effort across each project plan. Here you can actually see that we have something like, would you like to create tasks based on the quoted services? Once I click create tasks, what you're going to do is see those same line items that came from that original quote basically populate over here to generate out the tasks. What this will do is basically bring in all of those line items. It'll bring in budgetary information around it. And you can even see here in some cases, if you'd already outlined who was working on this deliverable and how many hours it was supposed to be, it even will help bring that information in. If you don't say who it is and it's just a role, it'll leave that blank for the time being. And then from there, what you'll be able to do is go ahead and start creating these tasks, for instance, and then that'll just get us a little bit closer to building out the project plan. We're not 100% of the way there, but we're a lot closer. And the reason for that is because we have our phases already brought in. Now we have our tasks in the system. The last step of this is actually considering the time frame of the project and really planning out all of the details related to it. In some cases, some of our clients like to rely on something like a list view, for instance. The list view can be really useful if you're just used to something like clean and cut, of course, but some of our clients will rather go ahead and rely on something like a Gantt view, for instance. The Gantt view is something that might be a new adoption. It might be something that you're already familiar with, but you will be able to go ahead and start kind of planning out the project, for instance. And then from here, you can actually see we have all of these different tasks populated. Once again, we don't know start date and due date, but as a PM, I should probably start planning a lot of this out. And I can go ahead and click and drag it, for instance. So if I wanted to, I can go ahead and do something like this. I can even take into consideration kind of what time frame that we're discussing this on. And maybe I know that this is going to be this week, that one will be that week. I'll be able to go ahead and create any level of dependencies across this. As something like this gets pushed out, we'll see everything else get pushed out with it as well. So that's going to be what a lot of that project planning process consists of. And naturally, you would just rinse and repeat this process until you have as much of a project plan as you can figure it out. To summarize, what we discussed right now is the quote view, which is essentially going to serve as your project budget. Once you turn that into a project and start bringing it into the project view, what you will do is see a budget aligned to that project. The option to bring the line items from the quote over as tasks always will exist as well. And that then basically ties each of these tasks to the line item budgets in the quote as well. From there, a PM will, of course, start planning things out, maybe dictating some timelines, adding dependencies, so on and so forth. And the ultimate goal of this is to be able to lead into a project that's completely planned out. And now we're able to start focusing on the actual work that's being done and how much time the team is spending, so on and so forth. So now we're moving away from planning and we're really diving into insights, for instance. Awesome. So with this project, it's actually a duplicate of the project that we created. But what will end up happening is that within this project view, we have a lot of information existing inside of it. So this view is going to be something that's a little bit more of an admin role view, whereas we have simpler views or no views, depending on your level of permissioning for the rest of your team. In this case right now, you can see here that we're able to see who the PM is. We're also able to go ahead and see who the team is. We can see things like the title of the project, the different statuses. Different statuses can be customized as needed. We're able to see how much time that we've spent on this project. And here you can actually see total breakdown versus what's there still left to do. And then you can also go ahead and see in instances when the team may or may not have over-serviced on this project. Someone at some point tracked time when we didn't want them to. We don't know when yet, but we know that it happened. 30 minutes isn't the end of the world, but if it was something like 30 hours, it would probably require a lot more hand holding. From there, you can go ahead and enable a whole bunch of different KPIs that you want to be able to track. So this is already giving us a bit of a detailed breakdown. We can see things like billable hours versus non-billable hours. We can go ahead and see how much cost have we incurred to date. We can also go ahead and see things like forecasts, for example, too, so that we're able to understand whether or not any of these projects are maybe going to go over their estimated budgets that we had set up or if they're on track. In some cases, some of our clients even like to go ahead and set up things like triggers so that they get notified if something like the forecasted profit margin drops below something like, let's say, 35%. If that occurs, then you will get an email notification in your system so that you're aware of it. Same thing could be done against any of these different metrics that you see here. Besides being able to get just quick high-level insights, like I mentioned before, we're able to see our project plan, which is great. Based on how we're planning out the project, the fact that we're bringing in these different roles, they have their different rates against them, so on and so forth. What you will be able to benefit from as well is going to be something like a budget insights tab. What that consists of is being able to do a burn chart, for instance. You here can see a breakdown of both your cost burn and your revenue burn based on how the project is planned out. If things get pushed out, if you bring in expensive resources, if things become out of scope, so on and so forth, the impact will be visible here across the entire kind of budget of the project. But in some instances, we then want to break that down. And what that consists of is a breakdown table that actually outlines all of the roles you outlined. It shows you the total budget that they were supposed to have and how they're performing against it so far versus even what they're planned to do. Same thing could be said for anything that is hard cost associated against this project. So sometimes you might have things like equipment, materials, travel, so on and so forth. We have those budgets in here as well, and we would be able to go ahead and understand what's going to happen with them as the team is working on it. Awesome. All right. So this is going to be what it looks like to already start having some insights into the system. When we start thinking about what kind of the financial implications of having this project is, what we want to do is maybe do something like a bit more of a detailed breakdown on things like what's going on with this project. There is going to be detailed breakdowns and there are high level breakdowns. What are the high level breakdowns? In some cases, you just want to see your cut numbers. And here you can actually see in this table view what your revenue is intended to be, as you can see here, versus maybe what your cost is, so on and so forth. Apologies, I'm in the States. The numbers look a little wacky. From there, you'll also be able to go ahead and see what's been invoiced to date. Invoice to date is actually based on actual work that's been either sent to the client, sent to your suppliers, so on and so forth. So here you can see that we've invoiced something like about 25% of the project. And you can see here that the labor cost, it's just based on the work that's done. So track time and internal cost rates versus external cost, which is going to be, for instance, any bills or expenses that you're adding against a project. Where are you able to go ahead and do that? In some cases, our clients are doing it directly inside of Scoro. You can log things like purchase orders, bills, expenses, so on and so forth. But you will also be able to go ahead and, as your team is adding this into the system, see the implications on that table. In some cases, our clients are using Sage or QuickBooks or Expensify or Ramp or Xero, so many different tools to handle those processes. In some instances, it can be a native integration, as is the case with Sage and Expensify and QuickBooks. In other instances, maybe we rely on something a little bit more third party in order to connect some of these other tools, for instance. All of that is going to be reflected here so that we're able to now see that even though we've invoiced something like 10,000, what we want to also understand is how much work we've done to date. Income is not at all related in some ways to earned revenue. Sometimes you're doing really well, sometimes you're not doing so well, sometimes you bill up front. There's a lot of different reasons for why you want that insight. And you can see here how you're performing so far. The system is then taking that information compared to where you're supposed to be, thinking about what there is still left to do, and then what it's going to go ahead and generate is a forecasted profit margin so that you're able to understand whether or not anything is at risk.
Taqiya, can I just quickly interrupt? There was a question from Helen saying, is there a way of including a non-billable line in a project?
So with non-billable lines in projects, if it's something like your budgeting, for instance, yes, you could theoretically do it in the quote. You don't have to have a budget for it, for instance, but there is an opportunity for the team to always track non-billable time within the system. What we recommend sometimes is that maybe you actually understand the total number of hours that is and budget it in the quote. Oftentimes things kind of change throughout the duration of a project, and you will be able to make necessary modifications to the total hours of the project without it implicating the rest of the budget if you wanted to, just so you know. So there is a way to go ahead and budget for that and then see how you're performing against it.
Gary, you had a question as well.
Can you see the question, Taqiya?
Yes, I do see it. Thank you. So in this case right now, such as journals, payment runs, supplier POs, VAT returns, so on and so forth. So there is one kind of key thing that we want to discuss. Scoro does not replace a general ledger. Instead, it integrates with a general ledger. What that means is that we do support things like invoice creation, PO creation for tracking purposes, purchase invoices or bills, and then also logging expenses in the system. What you will be able to do from there is basically have a lot of these financial documents syncing back and forth between accounting tools like Sage, Xero, QuickBooks, so that you're able to handle that process. So with something like supplier POs, yes, we can handle that, for instance. With things like payment runs, typically you can go ahead and actually see things like payment status, for instance, but a lot of times this payment status is actually syncing from the accounting tool that you have. Some of our clients that are doing kind of checks or bank transfers manually, they may rely on doing this, but we don't see that as much. It is possible where you can mark it as paid within the system, but you're not running the payment through the system. All right, so that's going to be what that process looks like. We've spent a lot of time really understanding, in this case right now, how a budget is being burned, what is the impact of it. But at the end of the day, the beginning of this demo did start with us having a quote and bringing all details of the quote over to the project. So naturally, if I'm doing all of that work, I want to be able to see insights on that as well. How do I get those insights? I will have something called a quoted versus actuals table. That quoted versus actuals table can be something a little bit high level, for instance, where you would be able to go ahead and see something like all of the different phases that you have. You can see the total number of hours per each of these phases. And now what we're doing is seeing actual income to date. So that comes from invoices. We're able to go ahead and see things like cost. We're able to go ahead and see bills and expenses, labor costs, so on and so forth. But in some instances, when things do go over, you will be able to go ahead and see that as well. So in this instance, for the first task, the team tracked an extra 30 minutes, which is actually tied directly to the overscheduled hours that we saw earlier today. What that will do is go ahead and show what implication that could have on the project. Again, in some instances, it's not that big of a deal. In other instances, it can be. But oftentimes what happens is a lot of our clients are relying on this throughout the project every once in a while. But really, when you have 20 different brand refresh projects in Q1 and you want to learn from them, you can actually go ahead and run reports to understand how you're doing across all of them. Maybe phase one is always where your team is going over scope because discovery and planning and just understanding the current brand state, so on and so forth, actually does take more effort than what you thought. Whereas phase two, you're constantly saving money, and phase three, you're breaking even. So if you see those types of trends in the system, not just on a project by project basis, but across all of our reports, then you can start making necessary business decisions to be reflective of that. Maybe what that does in the future is reduce the need for change orders. Maybe we can't guarantee that, of course, but it would be a great thing to be able to start taking the information you're putting into the system, seeing the output, taking that output, and then now making necessary changes to your quote templates and your budgeting processes and so on and so forth. So this was a bit of a quicker demo. Please feel free to reach out if you have any other questions, but I am going to go ahead and pass it back over to Harv, who can go ahead and wrap up for us.
Thank you, Taqiya. And just a couple of things that I really love. Like my team, we created a huge library of quote templates, so our account managers could really quickly drop those in and then just customize based on the client scope. Another thing I really loved in those project burn-up charts Taqiya was showing is not only how your burn to date is, but it predicts where your project's going to land in terms of time and budget if things stay on the current kind of trajectory. So that's really interesting information for your kind of project managers. I'm going to share my last couple of slides and then we will hand it back to Ian. So hopefully you can see that again. So again, you can sign up for a free trial or personalized demo at Scoro.com. So do check that out if you're interested in learning more. And a couple of other things. I was talking about maturity earlier, right? I talk about this a lot because I think it's really important. And in fact, I've been working on this business maturity assessment, which I've just launched a couple of weeks ago. Some of you may have seen that on LinkedIn and so on. It takes about 3 minutes. You answer 25 questions. And not only do you get an understanding of what stage your business is in today, but we give you advice on what you could be doing to get to that next level. When I first discovered this idea of business maturity models, it was very eye-opening for me because rather than just having a hunch about how our business was doing and maybe over-indexing on how well I thought we were doing, it really set my expectations or understanding of actually we've got a lot of growth to do in certain areas. So there's a QR code there, but of course I post about this all the time on LinkedIn recently because it's just something I've gone live with. So do check out my LinkedIn. And of course, lastly, there's the handbook, the operations podcast. So if you're not a subscriber, please do check that out. Every 2 weeks, I interview really brilliant agency, consultancy, operational leaders talking about the operational challenges that we're all dealing with, like every day, every week, and getting advice on how to make things run better. So if you don't already, do check that out.
Yeah, if any of you, I suppose one thing to take away as well is we see inside a lot of different agencies, agency hackers, just Harv and the team will. And a lot of them, it's surprising how many of them run on a hope and a prayer, like that you're still using spreadsheets, just this massive fragmentation of technology. And even at the bigger end, like the big consultants, they spend so much money on internal communication teams due to the simple reality that most of the people don't talk to each other. So just having, whether it's Scoro or whatever, but having people on some kind of robust platform where everyone is seeing the same data, it's not normal. Like it seems like a hygiene factor, but it's very transformative, and that will put you ahead of quite a lot of other businesses. So, and if you're in an operations role, you're a great person to drive that. So yeah, hope this kind of put some ideas in your head.
Just to complement your point, I would say in this kind of current era that we're in, where pipelines are a bit shallow, perhaps, and things are taking longer to convert, and there's just this like fear of the revenue we're generating and profitability, right? So when you're running in that kind of really chaotic way, that's putting you at risk, and we really need to sort that out sooner than later.
Yeah. It's a bit like the oil industry. When like the oil price is really high, they don't worry about efficiencies. It's just get it out the ground. But when the oil price is like $20 a barrel or something, it's all about efficiencies. And I feel this kind of era is the time to be focusing on this stuff. So yeah, any other questions, just follow up via email. And thanks to Harv and Taqiya and for taking us through that. And yeah, thanks for your questions. And we'll see you in the future. Thank you.